The hydraulic fluid under Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez's fingernails had been there so long it had become part of her identity. At 29, she moved through Kadena Air Base's massive aircraft hangar in Okinawa like a ghost -5'6" and steel-toed. Boots, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, safety glasses perpetually smudged with grease. Her faded olive coveralls bore the patches and stains that told a story everyone thought they knew. Another enlisted mechanic, another wrench turner, keeping the F-16 Fighting Falcons airworthy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But Airman First Class Marcus Thompson, fresh out of technical school, had been asking the kind of questions that made the veteran mechanics exchange knowing glances. "Sarge, why do the pilots always request you for their pre-flight inspections?" He'd asked last Wednesday, watching Elena run her hands along the wing surface of Viper 204 with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. "I mean, no offense, but Senior Airman Williams has been here longer, and Master Sergeant Jackson outranks you." The hangar went dead quiet. Even Tech Sergeant Mike Chun, who'd been torquing bolts on an engine mount, paused his pneumatic wrench and looked over with the expression of someone watching a new guy step on a landmine. "Rodriguez knows fighters," Chun said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken history. "Leave it at that." What they didn't tell Thompson, what most people on base had either forgotten or never knew, was that Elena Rodriguez used to be a legend. 4 years ago, she was Kadena's most decorated F-16 pilot, call sign Phantom. She'd logged over 800 combat hours across 3 deployments in the Middle East, with a record that read like something out of Top Gun, 13 confirmed air-to-air victories, including a legendary engagement where she'd outmaneuvered 2 enemy MiGs in a canyon barely wider than her wingspan. Other pilots called her the Shadow because she could disappear into terrain features that shouldn't have been able to hide a fighter jet, only to emerge behind enemy aircraft like she'd materialized. Out of thin air, Elena had an intuitive understanding of the F-16 that went beyond technical manuals. She could feel mechanical problems through subtle vibrations in the stick, diagnose engine issues by the sound of turbine rotation, and push the aircraft's performance envelope in ways that made engineers nervous and enemies dead. Her maintenance debriefs were legendary, detailed reports that helped ground crews prevent failures before they happened. Then came the mission that changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine escort mission, protecting a transport aircraft carrying humanitarian supplies to a refugee camp. The intelligence briefing had been clear: minimal threat, local air superiority established, simple milk run to build flight hours for newer pilots. Elena was flying wing for Captain David Martinez, a competent but inexperienced pilot on his first deployment. The ambush came out of nowhere. 3 enemy fighters concealed in a mountain valley, rising like hawks striking prey. The first missile took out Martinez's aircraft before he could even transmit a warning. Elena watched her wingman's F-16 disintegrate in a ball of fire and shrapnel. The pilot who'd been joking about his girlfriend's letters. Just minutes before now, nothing but debris falling toward the desert floor. The engagement that followed lasted 14 minutes and became the stuff of Air Force legend. 1 F-16 against 3 enemy fighters, Elena using every canyon, ridge, and cloud formation as cover while systematically hunting her opponents. She'd turned the sky into a chessboard, forcing the enemy pilots into positions where their numbers meant nothing, where her superior skill and aircraft knowledge gave her every advantage. She got all 3. But when the gun camera footage was reviewed, when the after-action reports were filed, when the medals were handed out, Elena couldn't stop seeing Martinez's aircraft coming apart. Couldn't stop hearing his cut-off radio transmission. Couldn't stop thinking about the letter from his girlfriend that had been in his flight suit pocket. A letter She'd had to help pack with his personal effects. The nightmares started 2 weeks later. Every time she climbed into an F-16 cockpit, she saw Martinez's face in the canopy reflection. Every engine startup sounded like screaming metal. Every weapons systems check made. Her hands shake as she remembered the weight of pulling triggers that ended lives. 6 months after the engagement, Elena Rodriguez voluntarily requested transfer to aircraft maintenance. She traded her pilot wings for a wrench, her flight suit for coveralls, her place in the sky for a position on the ground. The official paperwork cited career diversification goals and interest in technical specialization. The unofficial whispers told a different story. Shame she lost her nerve. All that training wasted. At least she knows the aircraft well enough to fix them. Phantoms become a ghost of herself. Elena heard every whisper, absorbed every pitying look, endured every assumption about her supposed failure of courage. She never responded, never defended herself, never explained that she hadn't lost her nerve. She'd lost her ability to risk another pilot's life under her command. Instead, she threw herself into maintenance work with an obsession that bordered on religious devotion. She memorized every technical manual, learned every system, studied every modification and upgrade, until she knew the F-16 better than the engineers who designed it. She could rebuild engines blindfolded, troubleshoot avionics failures that stumped senior technicians, and spot potential mechanical problems that computer diagnostics missed. Her pre-flight inspections became legendary for their thoroughness. 3-hour examinations that other mechanics would complete in 30 minutes. But here's what nobody realized. Elena hadn't stopped being a pilot. She'd become something more dangerous. A pilot who understood every bolt, wire, and component that kept fighters in the air. She knew which modifications could squeeze extra performance from engines, which weapons configurations optimized for specific mission profiles, and which seemingly minor adjustments could mean the difference between life and death in combat. She was still watching, still listening, still ready. The morning that would change everything started with routine, maintenance bulletins and coffee that tasted like jet fuel. Elena arrived at 0500 hours, 2 hours before the official duty day began, because the hangar was quieter then. She could work without interruptions, without questions, without the weight of other people's expectations. The morning briefing at 0700 hours was standard. Peacetime operations, training flights, proficiency sorties, equipment checks. The international situation had been stable for months. North Korea was making its usual threatening noises, but intelligence indicated no immediate concerns. China was conducting naval exercises in international waters, but nothing unusual for the region. Elena was calibrating engine pressure sensors when the first alert came through at 0930 hours. All personnel, this is base command, the announcement echoed through the hangar. Effective immediately, security condition Charlie is in effect. All personnel report to stations and await further instructions. The mechanics exchanged glances. Security condition Charlie meant a general threat to base personnel and resources. It wasn't quite emergency status, but it was several steps above normal operations. Elena continued her work, but her ears were tuned to the radio chatter now. Something was happening, something that was making the command structure nervous. At 10:45 hours, the second announcement came, and this one made her blood run cold. All personnel, security condition Delta is now in effect. This is not a drill. All aircraft maintenance crews report to flight line immediately for emergency combat preparation. All off-duty pilots report to squadron-ready rooms for immediate briefing. Security condition Delta meant imminent threat. It meant the possibility of actual combat operations. Elena dropped her tools and ran toward the flight line, where controlled chaos was already taking shape. Pilots were sprinting toward aircraft that ground crews were frantically preparing for combat loadouts. The peaceful training environment of 5 minutes ago had transformed into something that looked like preparation for war. Rodriguez. Master. Sergeant Jackson's voice cut through the noise. Viper 204 needs full combat prep. Priority 1. Whatever you were working on, drop it. Viper 204. Elena knew that aircraft like her own heartbeat. She'd been the pilot who'd put the most hours on it during her flying days, and she'd been its primary maintenance technician for the past 4 years. Every system, every quirk, every microscopic imperfection, she knew them all. As she began the rapid combat preparation checklist, Elena couldn't help but notice the pilots preparing for launch. Young faces, confident voices, the swagger of aviators who'd trained for combat, but never experienced the weight of actual life-and-death decisions in the cockpit. They reminded her of Martinez, but there was no time for memories now. Whatever was happening, Viper 204 needed to be perfect. Lives would depend on every system functioning flawlessly, every weapon loading correctly, every component performing beyond specification. Elena Rodriguez might not be flying anymore, but she was about to send someone else into harm's way in an aircraft that had to be absolutely perfect. The question was, would her 4 years of obsessive preparation be enough when the shooting started? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The intelligence briefing at 11:30 hours painted a picture that transformed Kadena Air Base from a peaceful training facility into the front line of a potential shooting war. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base commander, stood before a packed auditorium of pilots, ground crews, and support personnel. Her weathered face carried the gravity of someone delivering news that could change everything. Behind her, satellite imagery displayed on massive screens showed formations of aircraft that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. At 08:00 hours local time, Colonel Mitchell began, her voice cutting through the tension. Chinese naval aviation launched what they're calling routine training exercises from carriers positioned 200 nautical miles southeast of our location. What makes this unusual is the scale and timing. The first satellite image showed aircraft carriers surrounded by destroyers and support vessels. The second image made everyone in the room inhale sharply. Dozens of fighter aircraft arranged in attack formations, far more than any training exercise would require. Intelligence indicates we're looking at approximately 60 J-20 stealth fighters, 40 J-15 carrier-based aircraft, and supporting electronic warfare platforms. They've established what appears to be a combat air patrol directly in international shipping lanes. Major Kevin Walsh, the squadron commander, raised his hand. "Ma'am, are we looking at an actual invasion scenario or elaborate saber rattling?" The colonel's expression grew grimmer. At 09:15 hours, a Japanese maritime self-defense force patrol aircraft was intercepted and forced to divert from its routine surveillance route. No shots were fired, but the message was clear. At 1000 hours, 3 commercial cargo vessels reported being escorted by Chinese naval units away from their planned shipping routes. Elena felt her stomach drop. This wasn't posturing. This was the methodical establishment of a military exclusion zone, the kind of territorial expansion that happened right before shooting wars began. "Our mission is clear," Colonel Mitchell continued. "We maintain readiness to defend international shipping lanes and support our Japanese allies if requested. All aircraft are being configured for combat operations. Pilots, you'll be briefed on specific mission profiles in your squadron. Ready rooms. Ground crews, I need every available aircraft combat ready within 6 hours." As personnel began filing out toward their respective duties, Elena caught fragments of conversations that painted the full picture. The Chinese weren't just flexing military muscle, they were testing American resolve. Every response would be analyzed, every reaction measured. The wrong move could trigger a shooting war. The wrong level of preparation could invite aggression. But most importantly for Elena, she heard something that made her blood freeze. We're looking at potential air engagements against stealth fighters with capabilities that match or exceed our F-16s. Back on the flight line, the controlled chaos of combat preparation was unlike anything Elena had witnessed during peacetime operations. Weapons loaders were mounting a IM-12 OM-RAM missiles and a IM-9 sidewinders with the precision of surgeons. Fuel trucks moved between aircraft like worker ants serving a colony. Every movement had purpose. Every action carried the weight of potential combat. Elena focused on Viper 204 with laser intensity. The aircraft had been assigned to First Lieutenant Jake Sullivan, a capable pilot with 400 hours in the F-16 but zero combat experience. As she worked through the pre-combat checklist, Elena found herself thinking about Sullivan's girlfriend, whose picture was taped to his helmet bag. About his parents, who'd driven from Nebraska to watch his graduation from pilot training. About all the things that made pilots human instead of just statistics. The weapons systems check revealed the first problem. The radar warning receiver was showing intermittent faults, split-second gaps in coverage that would be invisible during peacetime training, but potentially fatal against advanced enemy aircraft. Most technicians would have signed off on it as within acceptable parameters. Elena knew better. She pulled the RWR unit and began tracing circuits with the methodical precision of someone whose work would soon be tested by missiles designed to kill. The fault was microscopic, a connector showing signs of corrosion that would cause complete system failure under the stress of high-G maneuvering. Rodriguez. Tech Sergeant Chen called from across the flight line. "How's 204 looking?" Sullivan scheduled for the first combat air patrol in 90 minutes. "RWR replacement needed," Elena called back, already reaching for her toolkit. "Give me 45 minutes. Chen jogged over, his face showing the stress of trying to prepare 12 aircraft simultaneously. "Elena, we don't have 45 minutes. The brass wants everything airborne on schedule. Can't you just reset the system?" Elena looked up from the aircraft's belly, her safety glasses reflecting the afternoon sun. "Mike, if Sullivan gets jumped by a J-20 and his RWR fails to detect the missile lock, he's dead. Reset won't fix corroded connectors." "But the system passes all diagnostic tests," Chun protested. "Command isn't going to understand delaying a mission for preventive maintenance." For a moment, Elena was transported back 4 years to another conversation about acceptable risk, another set of pressures to launch aircraft that weren't quite ready. She remembered Martinez climbing into his F-16 with a hydraulic system that passed all tests but felt wrong to her experienced hands. She'd mentioned it to the maintenance supervisor, been told that diagnostics showed green across the board, that mission schedules couldn't accommodate pilot hunches. Martinez had died when that hydraulic system failed at the worst possible moment. "Mike," Elena said quietly, "I'm not signing off on this aircraft until it's perfect. Period." Chun studied her face and saw something that reminded him why experienced mechanics trusted Rodriguez's judgment more than computer diagnostics. "Okay, 45 minutes. But if command asks questions, you're explaining the delay." Elena nodded and disappeared back into the aircraft systems. The RWR replacement was technically a 2-hour job requiring specialized test equipment and careful calibration. Elena did it in 38 minutes, using techniques she'd developed during her pilot days when she'd worked alongside maintenance crews who understood that pilot lives depended on their precision. As she ran final systems checks, Airman Thompson appeared beside the aircraft, his young face showing a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "Sarge, I don't understand something," he said, watching Elena's hands move across test panels with practiced efficiency. "If you know aircraft systems this well, why aren't you an officer? Why aren't you in charge of maintenance operations? Elena paused her work, looking at the young airman who reminded her of herself 8 years ago, eager, confident, convinced that rank and position determined capability. Thompson, she said carefully, there's a difference between being in charge and being responsible. I can do more good with a wrench in my hands than with paperwork on a desk. But you could have both, Thompson pressed. Senior technicians say you know more about F-16s than most engineers. You could be running this whole operation. Elena finished the final system check and closed the access panel. Viper 204 was now as perfect as human hands and knowledge could make it. Every system optimized, every component functioning beyond specification, every potential failure point eliminated. Thompson, she said, cleaning her hands on a shop rag, some people are exactly where they're supposed to be, even when it doesn't look like where they belong. She looked across the flight line at the other aircraft being prepared for combat. 12 F-16s that would soon be carrying pilots into potential air-to-air combat against some of the most advanced enemy fighters in the world. Each aircraft represented someone's son or daughter, someone's future that depended on the quality of work being done right now by mechanics who would never get credit for bringing pilots home alive. At 15:15 hours, the first flight of 4 F-16s taxied toward the runway for what command was calling Enhanced Defensive Patrol. Elena watched Lieutenant Sullivan climb into Viper 204, his movements showing the controlled nervousness of a pilot heading into potential combat for the first time. As the engines spooled up and the aircraft began their taxi roll, Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She'd done everything possible to ensure that aircraft would perform flawlessly, but she wouldn't be there to help when the shooting started. The question that haunted her as she watched the fighters disappear into the Pacific sky was simple. Would her work be enough when those young pilots faced enemies that wanted them dead? 2 hours later, the answer would begin revealing itself in ways that would test every assumption about courage, capability, and what it meant to serve from the shadows. While others flew into harm's way, the radio chatter started routine and professional. The kind of calm communication that characterized peacetime patrols. Elena monitored the frequencies from the maintenance hangar while performing post-launch inspections on the remaining aircraft, her practiced ear tuned to the subtle changes in pilot voices that indicated shifting situations. Dragon Lead, this is Kadena Tower. You are cleared to patrol Station Alpha 7. Maintain Angels 20 standard cap procedures. Roger, Kadena Tower. Dragonflight proceeding to station. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. That was Lieutenant Sullivan's voice, steady, confident, professional. Elena felt a small measure of satisfaction knowing that Viper 204's systems were performing flawlessly at 20,000 feet over the Pacific. The routine patrol chatter continued for 47 minutes. Then everything changed. Dragon Lead, be advised. We have multiple contacts bearing 090, range 60 nautical miles, altitude unknown. Contacts appear to be moving toward international shipping lanes. Elena's hands stopped moving on the wrench she'd been using to secure an access panel. 60 nautical miles meant the Chinese formation was closer than anyone had anticipated. Much closer. Dragon Lead copies. Proceeding to investigate contacts. Request immediate backup on standby. Negative, Dragon Lead. Maintain current position. Do not, repeat, do not approach contacts without specific authorization. Elena recognized the voice of Major Walsh, the squadron commander, cutting through the radio traffic with the authority of someone trying to prevent an international incident. But she also heard something else in the background chatter, the electronic warfare signatures that indicated the Chinese formation was actively jamming communication frequencies. Tech Sergeant Chun appeared beside her, his face grim. Rodriguez, command wants all remaining aircraft ready for immediate launch. Whatever's happening out there, They want options. Elena nodded, but her attention remained focused on the radio. Something was wrong. The communication gaps were getting longer, the static more pronounced. When pilots started having trouble communicating, bad things happened quickly. Dragon, lead to KADEN contacts are repeat. We have aggressive maneuvering. The transmission cut out completely. For 30 seconds, the radio was silent except for electronic interference. When Sullivan's voice came back, Elena heard something that made her blood run cold, the tight, clipped tone of a pilot under extreme stress. Kadena Tower, Dragon Lead. Be advised, contacts have launched aircraft. Multiple bandits, repeat. Multiple bandits inbound to our position. Request immediate assistance. The maintenance hangar erupted into controlled chaos. Pilots came running from the squadron building, flight gear in hand. Ground crews swarmed over the remaining 8 F-16s like emergency responders at a disaster scene. Elena found herself running toward Viper 207, the aircraft she'd been preparing for the second wave launch. Rodriguez. Master Sergeant Jackson's voice cut through the noise. 207 needs to be perfect. Captain Morrison is taking it up in 20 minutes, and intel says we're looking at J-20s. Elena felt her stomach drop. J-20s were China's most advanced stealth fighters, aircraft, designed specifically to kill F-16s. Captain Lisa Morrison was a good pilot, but she'd never faced anything like what was coming. As Elena began the rapid combat checklist, fragments of radio communication painted an increasingly desperate picture. Dragon 2 is defending. Broke left. Missile in the air. Dragon Lead, I've lost visual on 3. Splash 1 bandit. Dragon 4 got him. Dragon Lead to all aircraft, we are heavily outnumbered. Requesting immediate static, then silence. Elena's hands moved across Viper 207 systems with mechanical precision, but her mind was racing through the tactical picture developing 60 miles away. 4 F-16s against an unknown number of advanced enemy fighters. Even with superior pilot training, the math was ugly. The weapons loading crew arrived and began mounting a IM-12 AMRA MIS with desperate efficiency. Elena watched them work while running diagnostics on the aircraft's radar system, and that's when she spotted the problem that would have killed Captain Morrison. The APG-68 radar was showing perfect function on all diagnostic tests, but Elena noticed something others would have missed: a microscopic timing delay in the signal processing that would cause target lock failures against stealth aircraft. The delay was less than a millisecond, invisible to standard tests, but fatal against J-20s whose stealth characteristics exploited exactly that kind of system weakness. Weapons hot. Called the loading supervisor. Aircraft ready for launch. Negative. Elena called out, her voice carrying across the flight line with unexpected authority. Radar system fault. Do not launch. Captain Morrison, who'd been conducting her pre-flight walk-around, stopped and stared at Elena. Sergeant, I don't have time for maintenance delays. My wingman is already dead up there. Elena felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. Pilots, ground crews, officers who outranked her and didn't understand why an enlisted mechanic was grounding combat aircraft during an active engagement. But she'd been here before, in the moment where following procedure meant letting people die. Ma'am, Elena said, looking directly at Morrison, your radar will fail to lock onto stealth targets. The timing circuits have drift that diagnostic equipment can't detect. If you launch with this system, you'll be flying blind against aircraft designed to exploit this exact vulnerability. Morrison's face showed the frustration of a pilot watching her squadron get slaughtered while being told her aircraft wasn't ready. Sergeant Rodriguez, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I need to get airborne now. How long to fix whatever you think is wrong? Elena was already moving toward the aircraft's avionics bay. Give me 15 minutes. I don't have 15 minutes. Dragon flight is getting butchered out there. The radio crackled with confirmation of Morrison's fears. Dragon lead ... taking heavy fire ... lost Dragon 2 ... need immediate assistance ... Elena looked at Morrison, seeing herself 4 years ago, a pilot desperate to help, willing to accept risk to save lives. But she also saw Martinez, climbing into an aircraft with systems that tested good but felt wrong. "Captain," Elena said, quietly, 15 minutes to fix the radar, or you launch with equipment that will get you killed. Your choice." Morrison stared at her for a moment, then nodded curtly. 15 minutes. Not 16. Elena disappeared into the aircraft's electronics bay with tools and components that most mechanics wouldn't have recognized. The radar timing circuit replacement was a procedure that normally required specialized test equipment and factory-level calibration. Elena did it using techniques she'd learned during her pilot days, when she'd worked with maintenance crews who understood that sometimes you had to trust hands-on experience over computer diagnostics. While she worked, the radio continued painting a picture of aerial combat that was going badly for the American fighters. Dragon lead. "This is Dragon 4... I'm Winchester, returning to base." Dragon lead copies... Good luck getting home... double quotes Winchester, met out of ammunition. Dragon 4 had expended all missiles and was fleeing the combat zone. Elena could hear the exhaustion and defeat in the pilot's voice, the sound of someone who'd watched friends die and barely escaped with his own life. 12 minutes later, Elena emerged from Viper 207's avionics bay with grease-stained hands and grim satisfaction. The radar system was now optimized beyond factory specifications, calibrated to detect stealth aircraft using modifications she developed during years of studying enemy capabilities. "Systems check green across the board," she announced to Morrison, who was pacing beside the aircraft like a caged tiger. "Radar will lock onto stealth targets at maximum range." Morrison didn't question how Elena knew the modifications would work against J-20s. She simply nodded, climbed into the cockpit, and began the engine start sequence with the focused intensity of a pilot heading into combat. As Viper 207 taxied toward the runway, Elena caught Morrison's eye through the canopy. The captain gave her a sharp salute, the kind of acknowledgement between warriors that transcended rank and regulation. 10 minutes later, Captain Morrison was screaming toward the combat zone at 600 miles per hour, armed with weapons and sensors that Elena had personally optimized for killing the most advanced enemy fighters in the world. The question was whether it would be enough to turn the tide of a battle that was already going disastrously wrong for the American forces. As Elena watched Viper 207 disappear into the Pacific sky, she realized that her 4 years of preparation were about to be tested in the most violent way possible, in aerial combat against enemies who'd been designed specifically to kill everything she'd helped put in the air. The combat air control frequency erupted with electronic chaos as Captain Morrison's Viper 207 entered the engagement zone. Elena stood in the maintenance hangar, monitoring multiple radio channels while simultaneously directing the preparation of the remaining aircraft. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, but her mind was processing the tactical picture developing. 60 miles offshore, with the analytical clarity of someone who'd fought this kind of battle before. Viper 207. This is a WACS crystal. Multiple bandits bearing 0-8-5, Angels 22, range 30 nautical miles. Be advised you are heavily outnumbered. Morrison's voice came back steady despite the odds. A WACS crystal, Viper 207. Copies. I'm hunting. Elena felt a grim satisfaction at the confidence in Morrison's tone. The radar modifications were working perfectly. The captain was seeing targets that should have been invisible to standard F-16 sensors. But the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Dragon flight had been decimated, with only Lieutenant Sullivan's Viper 204 still engaged and Dragon 4 limping home with battle damage. Now Morrison was flying alone into a hornet's nest of advanced enemy fighters that had already proven they could kill American pilots. Rodriguez. Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the hangar noise as she strode toward Elena's workstation. The base commander's face showed the stress of someone managing a crisis that was spiraling beyond control. I need an honest assessment. How many aircraft can we put in the air, and how quickly? Elena looked up from the engine diagnostics she'd been running on Viper 205. Ma'am, 6 aircraft are combat ready with full weapons loads. 2 more need minor systems work, maybe 20 minutes each. The last 2 require major repairs that'll take hours, and the pilots to fly them? That was the question Elena had been dreading. Kadena had 12 F-16s, but only 8 qualified combat pilots currently on base. 2 were already in the air, fighting for their lives. 1 was dead, confirmed, when Dragon 2's emergency beacon had stopped transmitting. Another was wounded and grounded after Dragon 4's emergency landing revealed shrapnel damage to both aircraft and pilot. We have 4 pilots immediately available, Elena replied carefully. 2 more could fly with medical waivers, but they took hard hits during emergency landings. Colonel Mitchell studied the tactical display showing the combat zone. Morrison's aircraft appeared as a single blue dot, surrounded by multiple red indicators representing enemy fighters. What about pilot experience? How many have actual combat time? Elena felt her stomach drop. Ma'am, of the available pilots, only Major Walsh has air-to-air combat experience. The others are all peacetime trained. The implications hung in the air like smoke from burning aircraft. They were about to send inexperienced pilots against battle-tested enemies flying superior aircraft. It was a recipe for a massacre. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice, now showing the strain of high-G maneuvering under fire. A WACS crystal. Viper 207. I've got tone on the lead bandit. Fox 3. Elena held her breath. Fox 3 meant Morrison had fired an A-12 OM-RAM, the beyond visual range missile that represented their best chance against stealth fighters. The modified radar system Elena had installed would determine whether the shot was successful. Good hit. Good hit. Splash 1 bandit. Morrison's voice carried a mixture of relief and adrenaline. Viper 207 turning to engage second target. Elena felt a surge of vindication. Her radar modifications had enabled Morrison to achieve target lock and kill against a J-20, something that should have been nearly impossible with standard F-16 systems. But 1 kill against multiple enemies wasn't going to change the tactical picture. Ma'am, Elena said to Colonel Mitchell, there's something else. The enemy aircraft are using coordination tactics that suggest experienced pilots. They're not just relying on superior technology, they're outflying our people. The colonel's face grew grimmer. What's your recommendation, Sergeant? Elena found herself at a crossroads she'd been avoiding for 4 years. The honest tactical assessment was that sending more inexperienced pilots against this enemy would result in more American deaths. But keeping aircraft on the ground meant abandoning Morrison and Sullivan to fight impossible odds alone. Ma'am, request permission to brief the remaining pilots on enemy tactics and optimal engagement strategies. You're a maintenance technician, Rodriguez. Since when do you brief combat tactics? Elena met the colonel's eyes directly. Ma'am, I've fought J-20s before. Different designation, same basic airframe and capabilities. I know their weaknesses and how to exploit them. The colonel stared at her for a long moment, processing implications that would have been impossible to imagine an hour earlier. Rodriguez, are you telling me you have actual combat experience against advanced enemy fighters? Before Elena could answer, the radio erupted with Morrison's voice, now tight with stress. A WACS crystal, Viper 207 is defensive. Multiple bandits converging. Request immediate assistance. All available aircraft, launch immediately. Colonel. Mitchell ordered. Whatever briefing you've got, Rodriguez, make it fast. Elena found herself standing before 4 pilots who ranged from nervous second lieutenants to a confident major who'd never faced anything more dangerous than aggressive training exercises. Behind her, Viper 205 through 210 sat ready for combat. Their weapons and systems optimized by her 4 years of obsessive preparation. The J-20 has 3 critical vulnerabilities. Elena began, using the tactical display to illustrate her points. First, their stealth coding is optimized for X-band radar. Your aircraft have been modified to exploit gaps in their stealth spectrum. You can see them if you know how to look. Major Walsh, the most experienced pilot present, leaned forward. With interest, what's the engagement envelope? How close do we need to get for reliable targeting? 12 nautical miles for AMRAAM shots, but that's not your primary advantage. The J-20 sacrifices maneuverability for stealth. In close combat, a properly flown F-16 can outturn them. Elena switched to a tactical diagram showing aircraft. Performance envelopes. Force them into knife fight range and you negate their technological advantages. Second Lieutenant Angela Brooks, fresh from fighter training, raised her hand tentatively. Sergeant, how do you know all this? This isn't STANDARD intelligence briefing material. Elena paused, realizing she was about to reveal information that would change how everyone on base viewed her. Because I've killed 3 of them before. Different conflict, same aircraft capabilities. The room went dead silent. Elena could see the pilots processing this information, trying to reconcile the grease-stained mechanic with someone who had actual air-to-air victories against their most dangerous enemies. The key, Elena continued, is to force vertical engagements. The J-20's thrust-to-weight ratio drops significantly above 30,000 feet. Get them climbing, make them fight in thin air, and their advantages disappear. Major Walsh studied the tactical information with new respect. Rodriguez, with all due respect, why the hell are you turning wrenches instead of flying combat missions? Elena felt the weight of 4 years of carefully constructed isolation pressing down on her. These pilots deserved the truth, especially if they were about to risk their lives using tactics she'd developed through blood and experience. Because the last time I led people into combat against these aircraft, good pilots died following my orders. I couldn't handle the responsibility of making life-and-death decisions for other people. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Elena had never spoken those words aloud, never acknowledged the real reason she'd fled from command responsibility to the mechanical certainty of maintenance work. But, she continued, looking at each pilot in turn, you're going up there whether I help you or not. I can't stop people from dying, but I can give you the best possible chance of coming home alive. Lieutenant Brooks spoke first. What else do we need to know? For the next 8 minutes, Elena provided a tactical education that covered everything from optimal missile engagement parameters to emergency evasion techniques that had kept her alive during 13 air-to-air engagements. She drew on 4 years of analyzing enemy capabilities and developing countermeasures that existed nowhere in official training manuals. As the pilots prepared for launch, Major Walsh approached Elena privately. Rodriguez, I don't know what happened in your past, but what you just shared could save lives. These modifications you've made to our aircraft, how much difference will they make? Elena looked across the flight line at the 6 F-16s. That represented the sum total of her preparation over 4 years. Every system optimized, every weapon precisely calibrated, every sensor tuned to exploit enemy weaknesses she'd identified through painful experience. Major, those aircraft are more capable than anything that's ever flown off this base. Whether that's enough depends on how well you use what I've given you. As the engine spooled up and 6 more F-16s taxied toward potential combat, Elena realized she just committed herself to something she'd been avoiding for 4 years, taking responsibility for other people's lives in combat. The question was whether her knowledge and modifications would be enough to bring these pilots home alive, or whether she was about to relive the nightmare of watching good people die because she'd sent them into harm's way. The aerial battle 60 miles offshore had evolved into something resembling controlled chaos, with American and Chinese fighters weaving through 3-dimensional space in deadly ballet. Elena monitored 6 different radio frequencies while coordinating emergency repairs on the 2 remaining grounded aircraft, her experienced ear parsing the overlapping communications. To build a real-time tactical picture, what she heard made her blood run cold. Kodiak lead, this is Kodiak 3, I'm hit, repeat, I'm hit. Engine fire, losing altitude. That was 2nd Lieutenant Brooks, the young pilot who'd questioned Elena's tactical knowledge just 20 minutes earlier. Now she was fighting for her life in an aircraft that Elena had personally prepared. Kodiak 3, this is Kodiak lead. Can you make it back to base? Major Walsh's voice carried the strain of a commander watching his pilots get picked apart by superior numbers and technology. Despite Elena's briefing and aircraft modifications, the tactical math remained brutally simple. 12 enemy fighters against 7 American aircraft, with the enemy holding technological and positional advantages. Negative, Kodiak lead. I'm going down, ejecting now. Elena closed her eyes as she heard the words no ground crew ever wanted to hear. Somewhere over the Pacific, Lieutenant Brooks was now dangling beneath a parachute, hoping search and rescue could reach her before enemy ships did. The F-16 Elena had spent hours optimizing was now scattered across 20 square miles of ocean floor. Oh, Wax Crystal, this is Kodiak lead. I need immediate SAR for Kodiak 3. Pilot in the water, approximately 60 miles southeast of Kadena. Kodiak lead. Be advised ASR assets are grounded due to enemy air activity. Area remains contested. Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like lead armor. Brooks was down because Elena had sent her into combat with tactical advice and aircraft modifications that weren't enough. Another pilot was going to die because Elena's preparation had fallen short of perfect. Tech Sergeant Shun appeared beside her workstation, his face grim with news that would make an already impossible situation worse. Rodriguez, we've got a problem. Command just received intelligence that changes everything. Elena looked up from the radar diagnostics she'd been running on Viper 211. What kind of problem? The Chinese formation isn't just conducting military exercises. Intelligence indicates they're escorting a convoy of ships toward Taiwan. This whole engagement is cover for something bigger, a potential invasion scenario. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. The aerial battle wasn't an isolated incident or escalated training exercise. It was the opening move in a larger conflict that could drag the entire Pacific region into war. Every Chinese fighter they failed to stop meant enemy air superiority over a potential invasion force. How many enemy aircraft are we looking at? Total? Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. Initial count was 60 fighters. Current estimate is that we're only engaging their advance screen, maybe 20 aircraft. The rest are holding back to protect the convoy. Elena stared at the tactical display showing the positions of their remaining aircraft. 6 F-16s against 20 enemy fighters, with 40 more in reserve. Even with perfect tactics and superior pilot skill, the math was impossible. Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled over the base communication system. All senior personnel report to the command center immediately. This is not a drill. Elena found herself in the command center for the second time in 6 hours, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The controlled urgency of routine crisis management had been replaced by the grim efficiency of people. preparing for actual war. The situation has escalated beyond local engagement, Colonel Mitchell announced to the assembled officers and senior enlisted personnel. Pacific Command is treating this as a potential act of war. We're now operating under combat rules of engagement, with authorization to engage any hostile aircraft threatening Allied shipping or territorial integrity. Major General Patricia Hawkins, who'd flown in from Pacific Air Force's headquarters, took control of the briefing. We have confirmation that Chinese naval forces are moving toward Taiwan under cover of this air engagement. Every enemy fighter we allow to survive strengthens their air umbrella over the invasion force. Elena felt her stomach drop. This wasn't about defending shipping lanes or international law anymore. They were potentially looking at the opening hours of World War III, and her base was on the front lines. Current tactical assessment? General Hawkins asked, looking toward the intelligence officer. Ma'am, we have 6 F-16s engaged against 20. Confirmed enemy fighters, with enemy reserves estimated at 40 additional aircraft. Our pilots are performing above expectations, but the numbers are unsustainable. At current loss rates, we'll be combat ineffective within 2 hours. Elena watched the faces around the command center as the mathematics of aerial warfare painted an increasingly bleak picture. The young airmen looked nervous. The experienced officers showed the grim resignation of people who understood that sometimes the mission required accepting impossible odds. What are our options for reinforcement? The general asked. Closest Allied fighters are 4 hours out from Japanese bases. Nearest carrier air wing is 12 hours away. We're essentially on our own until tonight. General Hawkins studied the tactical display showing their aircraft as tiny blue dots surrounded by hostile red contacts. Colonel Mitchell, I need your honest assessment. Can your people hold until reinforcements arrive? Colonel Mitchell looked at the display, then at Elena, her expression suggesting she was considering options that hadn't existed an hour earlier. General, we have one asset that hasn't been fully utilized. Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and suddenly understood where this conversation was heading. The careful anonymity she'd maintained for 4 years was about to evaporate under the pressure of military necessity. Sergeant Rodriguez, General Hawkins said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. Colonel Mitchell has briefed me on your background. I understand you have extensive combat experience against this specific enemy aircraft type. Elena stood at attention, feeling the weight of a moment she'd been dreading for 4 years. Yes, ma'am. 13 confirmed air-to-air victories against J-20s and related Chinese fighter variants. The room went completely silent. Elena could see officers processing the implications. A maintenance sergeant with a combat record that exceeded most. Active pilots. Your assessment of the current tactical situation? The general asked. Elena looked at the display showing their 6 remaining aircraft engaged against impossible odds. Everything she'd learned about leadership, about the responsibility of command, about the weight of sending people into harm's way, came flooding back. General, our pilots are flying aircraft I've personally modified to exploit enemy weaknesses. Their training is solid, but they lack experience against coordinated enemy formations. They're fighting defensive actions when they need to be taking offensive initiative. Elaborate. Elena moved to the tactical display, her 4 years of analyzing enemy capabilities crystallizing into clear strategic thinking. The enemy is using standard Chinese doctrine, establish numerical superiority, then use coordinated attacks to overwhelm individual targets. Our people are reacting to enemy initiatives instead of forcing the enemy to react to ours. General. Hawkins studied Elena's face, seeing something that reminded her of the pilots who'd made impossible things happen during previous conflicts. Sergeant Rodriguez, what would you do differently? Elena felt the moment crystallizing around her like ice forming on aircraft wings. She could give a technical assessment, offer suggestions, remain safely in her maintenance role while other people risked their lives implementing strategy she'd developed through blood and experience, or she could accept the responsibility she'd been avoiding for 4 years. "Ma'am," Elena said quietly, "I'd need to be up there directing the engagement personally. These tactics can't be explained over radio. They require real-time tactical leadership from someone who's fought this enemy before." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Elena had built over 4 years of hiding from command responsibility. General Hawkins stared at her for a long moment, weighing regulations against necessity, protocol against results. "Sergeant Rodriguez," the general said finally, "how quickly can you be mission ready?" Elena looked through the command center windows at Viper 212, the aircraft she'd been preparing as a backup. Every system perfect, every weapon optimized, every modification representing 4 years of preparation for this exact moment. 15 minutes, ma'am. General Hawkins nodded slowly. "Then get suited up, Sergeant. You're about to find out if 4 years of preparation was enough to win an impossible fight." The flight suit felt foreign against Elena's skin after 4 years in coveralls, but her hands moved through the pre-flight checklist with muscle memory that transcended time. Viper 212 sat on the tarmac like a caged predator, every system optimized by Elena's own hands, every weapon calibrated to her personal specifications. This wasn't just an aircraft, it was 4 years of preparation crystallized into 16,000 pounds of lethal precision. As Elena conducted her external inspection, she noticed details that would have been invisible to other pilots. The slight modification to the air intake that improved high-altitude performance. The enhanced radar warning receiver she'd installed using techniques learned during her maintenance years. The weapon's pylons adjusted to optimize missile separation during high-G maneuvers. This F-16 was more than combat-ready. It was Elena's personal war machine, built to her exact specifications for fighting the deadliest enemies in the sky. Tech Sergeant Chun appeared beside the aircraft, his face showing a mixture of awe and concern. "Rodriguez. I mean, Sergeant... This is surreal. 4 years I've worked beside you, and I had no idea." Elena looked up from checking the missile guidance systems, her safety glasses reflecting the afternoon sun. "Mike, knowledge and capability are 2 different things. I've had the knowledge for 4 years. Today we find out if I still have the capability." Airman Thompson approached cautiously, carrying Elena's helmet and flight gear. The young airman who'd questioned her expertise that morning now looked at her with something approaching reverence. "Sarge, the other pilots are saying you have 13 kills against J-20s. Is that really true?" Elena accepted the helmet, feeling the weight of equipment she hadn't worn in 4 years. "Thompson, kills are just numbers. What matters is bringing everyone home alive." But even as she spoke the words, Elena felt the familiar pre-combat mental transition beginning. The analytical mechanic who'd spent 4 years avoiding responsibility was giving way to something darker, more focused. The part of her mind that calculated engagement angles and missile flight times was awakening from forced hibernation. Colonel Mitchell appeared as Elena completed her walk-around inspection. "Rodriguez, I need to know, are you mentally prepared for this? Leading combat operations is different from maintenance work. Lives depend on split-second decisions." Elena met the colonel's eyes directly. "Ma'am, I've been preparing for this mission for 4 years. Every modification I've made to these aircraft, every tactical analysis I've conducted, every system improvement, it was all preparation for this moment. And the responsibility of command? Can you handle ordering people into situations where they might die?" Elena felt the weight of Martinez's death, Lieutenant Brooks floating somewhere in the Pacific, all the pilots she'd sent into harm's way with her tactical advice and aircraft modifications. "Colonel, I've been carrying that responsibility for 4 years, The only difference is now I'll be there to share the risk. As Elena climbed into Viper 212's cockpit, she felt the aircraft respond to her presence like a living thing recognizing its natural pilot. Every switch, every display, every control surface had been positioned according to her personal preferences during countless maintenance sessions. The seat was adjusted to her exact specifications. The throttle response had been tuned to her flying style. Even the radio frequencies were programmed to her tactical requirements. Tower, this is Ghost Lead requesting immediate launch clearance. Elena transmitted, using her old call sign without conscious thought. Ghost Lead Tower, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. Winds 270 at 15. Altimeter 2-9er-9er-7. Good hunting. The engine spooled up behind her with the familiar whine of a machine built for violence. Elena felt the aircraft strain against the brakes, eager to return to its natural element. As she released the brakes and advanced the throttle, Viper 212 accelerated down the runway with the predatory grace of a hunting cat. The moment of liftoff felt like resurrection. For 4 years, Elena had been bound to the earth, working on aircraft that flew without her, watching other pilots take her modifications into combat. Now she was airborne again, climbing toward a battle that would test everything she'd learned about fighting impossible odds. A wax crystal, this is Ghost Lead. I'm airborne and proceeding to the combat area. Request current tactical picture. Ghost Lead, AWACS crystal. We show 14 bandits currently engaged with 6 friendlies. Additional enemy formations holding. At distance. Be advised, Kodiak 3 is still in the water awaiting SAR. Elena's jaw tightened. Lieutenant Brooks had been down for 47 minutes now, floating in survival gear while enemy and friendly fighters battled overhead. In these water temperatures, hypothermia would become critical within another hour. A well-waxed crystal, Ghost Lead. I'm taking tactical command of the engagement. All Kodiak flight elements report status. Ghost Lead, Kodiak Lead. We're heavily engaged, running low on missiles. Enemy formations are using coordinated tactics that are overwhelming individual aircraft. Elena could hear the exhaustion in Major Walsh's voice, the strain of fighting a losing battle against superior numbers. But she could also hear something else, relief that someone with experience was taking control. All Kodiak elements, this is Ghost Lead. Form up on my position for tactical coordination. We're changing the engagement parameters. As Elena climbed toward the combat zone, she felt the analytical part of her mind processing the tactical situation with crystalline clarity. The enemy was using numerical superiority to force defensive reactions, but they were also following predictable Chinese doctrine that could be exploited by someone who understood their operational patterns. The first enemy fighters appeared as dots on her modified radar display at 42 nautical miles, well beyond the detection range they should have expected from standard F-16 systems. Elena's radar modifications were working perfectly, giving her the kind of situational awareness that transformed defensive battles into offensive opportunities. Kodiak Flight, this is Ghost Lead. I'm reading 12 bandits in loose formation. At Angels 25, bearing 090. They're setting up for coordinated attacks on individual targets. We're going to disrupt their formation before they can execute. Ghost Lead, Kodiak 2. How do we engage 12 bandits with 7 aircraft? Elena smiled grimly as she armed her weapon systems, feeling the familiar weight of missiles and cannon shells ready for combat. Kodiak 2, we don't fight 12 individual targets. We fight one formation that's about to learn what happens when someone fights back. The merge happened at 600 miles per hour, with Elena leading 5 F-16s in a head-on attack against a Chinese formation that had been expecting to maintain tactical initiative. But Elena wasn't following standard American doctrine. She was using tactics developed during her previous combat experience Tactics that had never been taught in any training manual. Kodiak flight. Break high on my mark. Force vertical separation. Make them climb. Elena pulled Viper 212 into a vertical climb that stressed the aircraft's structural limits, leading the formation into thin air where Chinese thrust-to-weight ratios would work against them. Behind her, 5 American fighters followed her into Co. A climb that transformed the engagement from a horizontal furball into a vertical knife fight. The first J-20 that followed them up became Elena's first kill in 4 years. The enemy pilot, trained in Chinese doctrine that emphasized horizontal maneuvering, found himself in a vertical engagement where his aircraft's advantages became liabilities. Elena's AIM-9 Sidewinder found its target at 32,000 feet, turning a $90 million stealth fighter into burning debris falling toward the Pacific. Splash 1 Bandit, Ghost lead has tone on second target. But as Elena maneuvered for her second shot, she realized the tactical situation was more complex than a simple air-to-air engagement. The enemy formation was protecting something. A group of aircraft maintaining position 20 miles to the south. Aircraft that weren't participating in the dogfight. AWACS Crystal, Ghost lead. I need identification on contacts bearing 180, range 20 nautical miles. They're not engaging but maintaining formation. Ghost lead, AWACS Crystal. Those contacts appear to be electronic warfare aircraft maintaining jamming operations. Assessment is that they're protecting the main invasion force. Elena felt her blood freeze. The aerial battle was cover for something much larger, a coordinated electronic attack that was probably disrupting Allied communications across the entire Pacific region. Every minute those jamming aircraft remained operational strengthened Chinese capabilities for the larger invasion. As she engaged her second target, Elena realized that winning this dogfight wouldn't be enough. She needed to break through the fighter screen and eliminate the electronic warfare aircraft before they could complete their mission. The question was whether 7 F-16s could fight through 20 enemy fighters to reach targets that held the key to preventing a larger war. The dogfight had evolved into a 3-dimensional chess match played at supersonic speeds, with Elena orchestrating movements that defied everything the Chinese pilots had been trained to expect. Her second kill came during a diving attack that used Viper 212's enhanced engine modifications to maintain energy advantage through a maneuver that should have been impossible at that altitude. The J-20 pilot, following standard doctrine, found himself in a position where his stealth advantages meant nothing, and his superior technology couldn't compensate for tactical innovation. Splash 2, Ghost lead has second confirmed kill. But Elena's satisfaction was tempered by the tactical reality unfolding around her. Despite 2 successful engagements, the American formation was still outnumbered nearly 3-1, and ammunition was becoming critical. More importantly, every minute spent in the dogfight allowed the electronic warfare aircraft to continue their mission of disrupting Allied communications across the Pacific theater. All Kodiak elements, this is Ghost lead, ammunition and fuel. Status report. The responses painted a grim picture of a formation reaching the limits of combat endurance. Kodiak lead Winchester on AIM-9s, 2 Sidewinders remaining, fuel at 60%. Kodiak 2, 1 MRAM, 1 Sidewinder, fuel approaching bingo. Kodiak 4, completely Winchester, RTB for fuel and weapons. Elena processed the tactical data while maneuvering to avoid a missile fired by a J-20 that had managed to achieve firing position. The Chinese pilot was good, better than the previous 2 she'd killed, but he was fighting according to doctrine that Elena had been studying and countering for 4 years. Kodiak 4, negative on RTB, form up for escort duty. We're going after the high-value targets. Ghost lead, Kodiak 4, I'm out of missiles. How do I escort without weapons? Elena rolled Viper 212 inverted and pulled through a split S, maneuver that brought her behind the pursuing J-20, using every modification she'd made to the aircraft's performance envelope. Kodiak 4, you're flying a 16,000-pound missile with a pilot. Sometimes presence is more important than ordnance. The IM-9 Sidewinder that destroyed her third enemy fighter was fired from a position that most pilots would have considered impossible. A high deflection shock during a climbing turn that required Elena to lead the target by nearly 40 degrees. But she'd practiced this exact scenario during hundreds of maintenance sessions, visualizing engagements while her hands worked on weapon systems that she might someday use in combat. Splash 3, Ghost Lead, 3 confirmed kills. The radio erupted with acknowledgments from friendly aircraft, but Elena was already focusing on the next phase of the engagement. The electronic warfare aircraft were maintaining position 20 miles south, protected by a screen of fighters that hadn't yet committed to the dogfight. Breaking through would require tactics that pushed every aircraft and pilot beyond their designed limits. A wax crystal, this is Ghost Lead. I need detailed information on the EW aircraft. Configuration, escort strength, and defensive positioning. Ghost Lead, AWACS crystal. We show 4 electronic warfare aircraft in diamond formation, Angels 15, escorted by 8 fighters in layered defensive positions. Be advised, those EW birds are primary mission objectives for Pacific Command. Elena felt the weight of strategic necessity settling on her shoulders. The electronic warfare aircraft weren't just tactical threats. They were the linchpin of a coordinated attack that was probably disrupting Allied responses across multiple theaters. Destroying them could change the entire strategic balance of the developing conflict. All Kodiak elements, this is Ghost Lead. We're going to punch through the escort screen and eliminate the EW aircraft. This is a one-way mission. We probably won't have fuel or ammunition for extended engagement afterward. The radio was quiet for a moment as the pilots processed the implications. Elena was asking them to commit everything they had to a mission. That would leave them defenseless if they survived the initial attack. Major Walsh's voice came back first. Ghost Lead, Kodiak Lead, we've come this far. Let's finish it. Kodiak 2 copies. Let's show them what American pilots can do. Kodiak 3, Roger, for Lieutenant Brooks. Elena felt a surge of pride in the pilot she was leading. 4 years ago, she'd been unable to handle the responsibility of command because she couldn't bear the thought of sending good people to their deaths. Now she was asking these pilots to follow her into a mission that would test the absolute limits of their courage and skill. Kodiak Flight, this is Ghost Lead. Attack Formation Bravo 7. We're going in fast and low, punch through the escorts, and eliminate those EW birds before they know we're coming. The formation that Elena led toward the electronic warfare aircraft represented everything she'd learned about combining superior pilot skill with technological innovation. Each F-16 had been modified according to her specifications, optimized for the kind of high-speed, low-altitude attack that would minimize the enemy's technological advantages. The escort fighters detected their approach at 15 nautical miles. But Elena had anticipated their response. Instead of engaging the escorts directly, she led the formation through a series of terrain masking maneuvers that used the ocean's surface to break radar contact and appear to retreat from the engagement. Ghost Lead, Kodiak 2, they're buying it. Escorts are pursuing instead of maintaining defensive positions. Elena smiled grimly as she watched the enemy fighters abandon their protective formation to chase what they thought was a retreating American force. It was exactly the tactical mistake she'd been hoping to provoke. All Kodiak elements, execute hammer drop on my mark. 3.2. Mark. The attack that followed would be studied in military academies for decades. 6 F-16s appeared over the electronic warfare formation like avenging angels, attacking from multiple directions with precision that turned a carefully orchestrated defensive position into a killing field. Elena's modifications had given each aircraft capabilities that the enemy hadn't expected, allowing for missile shots from angles and ranges that should have been impossible. Elena's first shot at the electronic warfare aircraft was an MRAM fired from maximum range while the enemy was still trying to understand what was happening. The missile guidance system, enhanced by her modifications, maintained target lock through electronic countermeasures that should have broken the engagement. Fox 3. Ghost lead, missile away. The explosion that marked the destruction of the first electronic warfare aircraft was visible from 20 miles away, not just the fireball of a destroyed airplane, but the electronic signature of sophisticated jamming equipment being reduced to scattered debris. Immediately, RADIO communications across the Pacific began clearing up as 1/4 of the enemy's electronic warfare capability was eliminated. Direct hit, ghost lead, splash 1 EW bird. But the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The escort fighters were converging on the American formation, with the fury of pilots who'd realized they'd been outmaneuvered. Elena found herself in a turning fight with 2 J-20s while trying to line up a shot on the second electronic warfare aircraft. Kodiak lead, I'm engaged defensive. Take the shot on EW bird number 2. Major Walsh's response came through gritted teeth as he maneuvered through missile fire from 3 directions. Ghost lead, I'm Winchester. Kodiak 2, you're up. Elena watched on her tactical display as the second electronic warfare aircraft exploded under fire from Kodiak 2's last AMRAAM. 2 down, 2 to go. But the American formation was now completely out of long-range missiles and facing 8 angry enemy fighters who were no longer worried about maintaining defensive positions. The next 60 seconds would determine whether Elena's gamble had paid off, or whether she'd led 5 good pilots into a trap that would kill them all. As she maneuvered Viper 212 through the most violent air combat of her career, Elena realized that everything she'd prepared for during 4 years of mechanical precision was about to be tested in the most final way possible. A knife fight at 500 miles per hour where the only weapons left were skill, determination, and the modifications she'd made with her own hands. The final phase of the engagement became a masterclass in close-quarters air combat, with Elena leading 5 F-16s against 8 J-20s in a knife fight that would be remembered as one of the most intense dogfights in modern aviation history. With long-range missiles expended, the battle devolved into gun runs and short-range heat-seeking missiles, where pilot skill and aircraft performance mattered more than technological superiority. Elena found herself in a vertical scissors with 2 J-20s, using every modification she'd made to Viper 212's flight controls to maintain energy advantage through maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. The enemy pilots were skilled, but they were fighting an aircraft that performed beyond their intelligence estimates and a pilot who understood their tactics better than they understood hers. Kodiak 2, break right. You've got a bandit on your 6. Elena's warning came just in time for the young pilot to avoid a missile that would have ended his participation in the war permanently. But the tactical situation remained desperate. 6 American fighters against 8 enemies, with ammunition running critically low and fuel approaching emergency levels. The breakthrough came when Elena realized the enemy formation was making the same tactical mistake that had cost them the electronic warfare aircraft. They were fighting as individuals instead of as a coordinated unit. Chinese doctrine emphasized numerical superiority, but it didn't prepare pilots for the kind of fluid, adaptive tactics Elena was employing. All Kodiak elements, this is ghost lead, wagon wheel formation, center on the remaining EW birds. Force them to choose between protecting the mission and protecting themselves. What followed was Elena's tactical masterpiece, a coordinated attack that used the remaining electronic warfare aircraft as bait to force the enemy fighters into defensive positions that negated their numerical advantage. Instead of fighting, 8 separate engagements. The American formation forced the enemies into a single, concentrated battle where superior pilot training could overcome technological disparities. Elena's gun kill on the 4th. J-20 came during a head-on pass where she used Viper 212's enhanced cannon accuracy to achieve hits from a range that most pilots would have considered impossible. The 20mm shells that destroyed the enemy fighter were fired from a modified cannon system that Elena had personally calibrated during hundreds of maintenance sessions. Guns, 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 Splash 4. Ghost Lead has 4th confirmed kill. But the real prize was the 3rd electronic warfare aircraft, which Elena destroyed with her last Sidewinder during a diving attack that brought her within 50 feet of the ocean surface. The explosion eliminated another quarter of the enemy's jamming capability, further degrading their ability to coordinate the broader invasion operation. Fox 2, Ghost Lead Splash EW Bird No. 3. As the American formation maneuvered to engage the final electronic warfare aircraft, Elena realized they were facing a problem that no amount of tactical brilliance could solve. They were simply running out of everything needed to continue fighting. Fuel gauges showed emergency levels. Ammunition counters displayed zeros across multiple weapon systems. Even her modified aircraft had limits that were rapidly approaching. Ghost Lead, this is Kodiak Lead. I'm Bingo Fuel and Winchester. Need to RTB immediately, or I'm swimming. Major Walsh's transmission highlighted the reality facing the entire formation. They'd accomplished the impossible, destroying 3 electronic warfare aircraft and 4 enemy fighters, but physics was about to end their participation in the battle, whether they wanted it to or not. Elena looked at her own fuel gauge and realized she had perhaps 10 minutes of combat time remaining before Viper 212 would be gliding toward the ocean. But the final electronic warfare aircraft was still operational, still jamming Allied communications, still supporting whatever invasion operation the Chinese were conducting toward Taiwan. All Kodiak elements, RTB immediately, Elena ordered, making the decision that commanders had been making for centuries, accepting partial success to preserve forces for future operations. I'm staying to finish the mission. Ghost Lead, negative. Major Walsh's voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to trust Elena's judgment but refused to abandon her. We came out here together, we go home together. Elena felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with tactical calculations. 4 years ago, she'd transferred to maintenance because she couldn't handle the responsibility of leading people who trusted her. Now she was leading pilots who were willing to die rather than abandon her to fight alone. Kodiak Lead, you've got families to go home to. I've got a job to finish. The final engagement was Elena alone against 3 enemies, 2 J-20 escorts and the last electronic warfare aircraft. It was the kind of tactical scenario that existed only in the fevered imagination of military theorists. Except Elena was living it at 400 miles per hour, with less than 5 minutes of fuel remaining. The kill that would make Elena Rodriguez a legend happened during a maneuver that combined every skill she'd developed during 8 years of flying and 4 years of mechanical expertise. Using Viper 212's enhanced performance envelope, she executed a climbing spiral that brought her above and behind the electronic warfare aircraft, while the escorts were maneuvering to intercept her previous position. Her final AIM-9 Sidewinder, fired from a position that violated every engagement parameter in the tactical manual, destroyed the last electronic warfare aircraft in a fireball that marked the complete elimination of the enemy's jamming capability. Across the Pacific, Allied communications networks began functioning normally for the first time in hours. Fox 2. Ghost Lead, Splash Final EW Bird, mission accomplished. But accomplishing the mission and surviving it were 2 different things. Elena's fuel gauge showed less than 2 minutes of flying time remaining, and she was 60 miles from the nearest friendly airfield with 2 very angry J-20 pilots between her and home. The escape that followed would be talked about in pilot bars for decades. Elena used every modification she'd made to Viper 212, every technique she'd learned during 800 hours of combat flying, and every advantage provided by her 4 years of studying enemy tactics. She turned her aircraft into a ghost, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to disappear from enemy sensors while gliding toward Kadena on fumes and prayers. The landing was barely controlled flight into terrain with Viper 212. Touching down on Kadena's runway with empty fuel tanks and battle damage that would require weeks to repair. As Elena climbed out of the cockpit, she was met by Colonel Mitchell, General Hawkins, and a crowd of personnel who'd monitored the entire engagement from the command center. "Rodriguez," General Hawkins said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and professional respect. "That was the most tactically brilliant engagement I've witnessed in 30 years of military service." Elena pulled off her helmet, her hair falling loose around her shoulders as she looked at the aircraft that had carried her through the most important mission of her life. "General, I was just using equipment I'd prepared and tactics I'd studied. The real heroes are the pilots who trusted me enough to follow." But the general was already thinking beyond individual heroism to strategic implications. "Sergeant Rodriguez, the elimination of those electronic warfare aircraft has restored Allied communication capability across the Pacific theater. Intelligence indicates the Chinese invasion fleet is withdrawing rather than proceeding without air cover. You may have just prevented a global war." Elena looked across the flight line at the other F-16s returning from combat, their pilots climbing out with the exhausted satisfaction of people who'd done something impossible and lived to tell about it. Lieutenant Brooks had been rescued from the ocean and was recovering in the base hospital. The American formation had lost no additional aircraft, despite facing overwhelming odds. "General," Elena said quietly, "I was exactly where I was supposed to be." 3 weeks later, Elena Rodriguez stood in a different uniform, the dress blues, of a newly commissioned officer, as she received the Air Force Cross from the Secretary of the Air Force himself. The ceremony was attended by pilots from across the Pacific theater, many of whom had benefited from the restored communications her mission had provided. But the moment that mattered most to Elena came afterward, when Airman Thompson approached her with a question that had been bothering him since the engagement. "Ma'am," he said, using her new rank of second lieutenant, "I understand why you were a great pilot. What I don't understand is why you became an even better mechanic." Elena looked out at the flight line where new F-16s were being prepared for missions that might never come, thanks to the strategic victory achieved through tactical excellence. "Thompson, some people think preparation and action are separate things. They're not. Every hour I spent with a wrench in my hands was preparation for the hour I spent with a stick and rudder. Excellence isn't about what you do, it's about how completely you prepare for the moment when preparation becomes action." Elena Rodriguez had spent 4 years being called just a mechanic by people who didn't understand that she was actually becoming the most dangerous pilot in the Pacific. When 89 lives had depended on her flying skills, she'd been ready. Sometimes the most important battles are won by people who've been quietly preparing for war while everyone else assumed they'd given up fighting. The ghost of the maintenance hangar had returned to the sky, and the sky would never be the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.